What are you really doing here? This isn't just a funeral, is it? Who are you meeting? Who's inside right now?
Service. You need to step back.
Don't lie to me. I know what setups like this look like. You think nobody's watching? What the hell are you talking? Turn around. Now! You're being detained!
Before anyone arrived for the funeral service, one man was already in the parking lot, watching the entrance, waiting. He wasn't there to offer security. He wasn't responding to a call. According to later testimony, he had come with a specific person in mind and a reason to confront him. Less than 2 hours later, that confrontation would interrupt a burial, spark an internal investigation, and expose a chain of decisions driven by anger, personal grievance, and racial bias. But to understand why it happened, you have to start the day before the funeral. If you want the full breakdown of what really happened, from the venue dispute to the arrest and the investigation that followed, subscribe and stay with this story. Friday afternoon, Fayetteville. The reception office at Pritchard Memorial Services was quiet, except for the sound of paperwork sliding across the counter. Lieutenant Kellan Ellison, 34, stood upright with both hands resting flat on the polished wood surface. His posture was controlled, almost rigid, the kind of composure built through years of military structure. He had served over a decade in the Army, stationed near Fort Liberty, Logistics Command. People who knew him described him as disciplined, procedural, and careful with conflict. He was finalizing arrangements for his mother's funeral. Behind the counter, funeral director Gerald Pritchard adjusted his glasses and reviewed the booking schedule again. "I understand both families requested Saturday morning," Pritchard said, voice measured. "But your paperwork was completed first. The time slot is legally yours." Kellan gave a small nod. "Understood." The tension in the room shifted before anyone spoke again. A woman standing several feet away exhaled sharply, the sound controlled but unmistakably emotional. That was Lorraine Michelson. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles pale. She had arrived minutes earlier with her husband, Fayetteville police officer Brent Michelson. They had been trying to secure the same chapel for a funeral service on the exact same morning. Lorraine stepped forward first. "So that's it? You're just giving it to him?" Pritchard kept his tone neutral. "Ma'am, it was confirmed based on submission time and documentation." Her eyes moved to Kellan, not with grief, but with resentment. Brent Michelson hadn't spoken yet. He stood slightly behind his wife, jaw tight, eyes fixed on Kellan in a long, unbroken stare. Not the look of someone negotiating scheduling logistics, the look of someone assessing, measuring. Kellan noticed it, but didn't respond. Lorraine's voice sharpened. "We had family flying in. You don't even care." Kellan turned slightly, keeping his tone even. "I didn't make the schedule. I submitted paperwork like everyone else." Brent finally stepped forward, slow, deliberate. "That how you see it?" he asked. His voice carried weight, not loud but edged. He looked Kellan up and down in a way that felt less like conversation and more like evaluation. The uniform posture, the calm tone, the refusal to argue. Something about that seemed to irritate him. Pritchard cleared his throat, trying to diffuse the room. "There are other available time slots." Lorraine cut him off. "No, this was the only time that worked." She turned toward Brent, voice low but intense. "This is unbelievable." Brent didn't answer immediately. His eyes were still on Kellan. Then he leaned slightly toward his wife and spoke quietly, low enough that it almost didn't register, but close enough that Kellan heard it clearly. "He thinks he can just take what he wants." It wasn't the words alone, it was the tone, personal, accusing. Kellan met his gaze for the first time, calm, steady. Brent held the stare, then gave a faint, humorless nod, like he had just made a decision no one else could hear. "Yeah," he muttered. "We'll see about that." No one asked what he meant. But the next morning, he would show up early, waiting, watching, and he wouldn't come alone in his thinking. Brent Michelson arrived nearly an hour before the first vehicle pulled into the parking lot. He didn't park in the main row. He chose a spot along the far edge of the lot where he had a clear line of sight to the chapel entrance and the hearse lane. Engine off, windows slightly down, arms folded, watching. Funeral staff moved in and out of the building carrying flower arrangements. A maintenance worker unlocked the side gate. Everything was routine, quiet, controlled. Brent didn't move. He had already convinced himself something was wrong. He didn't need evidence, just justification. The image from the day before stayed fixed in his mind. Kellan Ellison standing calmly at the counter, speaking evenly, getting what he came for. No apology, no hesitation, no recognition of what he believed had been taken from his family. Lorraine's voice replayed louder. "You're just going to let that go? He embarrassed us. He thinks he can walk in and take over like he owns the place. Do something." Brent had barely slept. By morning, irritation had hardened into intent. He scanned every arriving vehicle like he was looking for confirmation of a theory he had already decided was true. Dark sedan, church van, family SUV, people dressed in black stepping out slowly, speaking quietly, holding programs. Nothing unusual. That didn't change his expression. At 9:12 a.m., a silver sedan turned into the lot and parked near the entrance. Brent straightened slightly in his seat. He recognized the driver immediately. Lieutenant Kellan Ellison stepped out first. Black suit, white shirt, dark tie. Movements controlled, precise, the same composure from the day before, but heavier now. His shoulders carried weight that had nothing to do with the uniform he wasn't wearing. He walked around the car and opened the passenger door. Nadine Ellison stepped out slowly, holding his forearm for balance. Her face looked drained from days without real sleep. Kellan didn't speak. He just steadied her and closed the door gently behind her. Brent watched the interaction with narrowed eyes. "Look at him," he muttered to himself, "like he runs the place." Kellan paused briefly near the rear of the vehicle, speaking quietly to Nadine. Their voices were too low to hear from Brent's position, but the body language was clear. Coordination, reassurance, shared grief. Brent didn't see grief. He saw control, confidence, presence. And something about that continued to irritate him. Another car arrived behind them, relatives stepping out, greeting Kellan with subdued embraces. One older woman held onto his hand longer than the others. He leaned down slightly to hear her, nodding once, expression tight but steady. Brent exhaled slowly through his nose. "Yeah," he said quietly, whole operation running smooth. His hand rested near the radio clipped to his vest, but he didn't touch it. Not yet. He wanted to observe longer, build something that looked official, something he could say out loud later. People continued filing inside. No disturbances, no suspicious movement, no signs of anything except a family preparing to bury someone they loved. Brent opened his car door and stepped out. His posture changed immediately. Shoulders squared, pace deliberate, authority in every step. He adjusted his duty belt, eyes locked on Kellan Ellison walking toward the chapel doors. "Let's see what you're really doing here," Brent said under his breath. Then he started walking straight towards him. And this time, he wasn't there to watch. Kellan Ellison had just reached the base of the chapel steps when he sensed movement behind him, fast, direct, purposeful. Footsteps closing distance without hesitation. He turned halfway, instinctively positioning his body slightly in front of Nadine. By the time he fully faced the parking area, Officer Brent Michelson was already within a few feet of him. No greeting, no introduction, just presence. Hard, confrontational, deliberate. "Stop right there," Brent said. His voice carried across the quiet entrance, sharp enough that several nearby relatives paused mid-conversation. A few heads turned immediately. Nadine's grip tightened on Kellan's arm. Kellan stayed still, calm, controlled. "Yes, officer?" Brent didn't answer right away. His eyes moved slowly over Kellan's suit, his posture, the people gathering behind him. The look wasn't inspection, it was accusation searching for something to attach itself to. "What's going on here?" Brent asked. Kellan blinked once, confused by the question, but not reacting emotionally. "My mother's funeral. Service starts at 10. Brent glanced toward the chapel doors, then back at Kellan. His jaw shifted slightly. "Yeah," he said flatly. "That what you're calling it?" A murmur moved through the small group of relatives standing nearby. Nadine looked between them, tension rising in her shoulders. Kellan's tone remained steady. "I don't understand what you mean." Brent took one slow step closer, close enough that their personal space disappeared. "I mean," Brent said, voice low but edged, "we've had reports about unusual activity tied to this gathering." Kellan held eye contact. "Reports from who?" "That's not your concern." "It is if you're making accusations." Brent's expression tightened, not because of the question, but because of the tone, calm, direct, unafraid. It irritated him. He shifted his weight and looked briefly toward the arriving vehicles again, like he was presenting the scene as evidence to an invisible audience. Large gathering, vehicles coming and going, closed space, coordinated timing. He looked back at Kellan. Common setup for controlled exchanges. A pause. Nadine's voice came out quiet but strained. "Are you saying this funeral is illegal?" Brent didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Kellan. "I'm saying," he replied slowly, "that sometimes people use events like this to cover other operations." The implication landed heavily in the silence that followed. One of Kellan's uncles stepped forward slightly. "Officer Michelson, that's inappropriate." Brent lifted a hand without looking at him. "Stay out of it." His focus never left Kellan. "You booked this location yesterday. Real quick turnaround, real controlled access. Interesting timing." Kellan's voice remained even, but firmer now. "We scheduled a funeral service after my mother passed away. That's not suspicious, that's normal." Brent's lip curled faintly. "Normal for who?" The question hung there, loaded, pointed, unmistakable. Kellan understood exactly what was being implied now. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture hardened, not aggression, but recognition. "This is a private service. If you have a warrant or formal notice, present it. Otherwise, you're interfering." Brent leaned slightly closer. "You giving me instructions?" "I'm asking what legal authority you're acting under." For a moment, Brent said nothing. His breathing slowed. His eyes moved again, not scanning, locking, decision-forming. Behind them, the funeral director, Gerald Pritchard, stepped cautiously out the chapel doors, sensing tension. "Officer Michelson, is there a problem?" Brent didn't turn. "Yeah, I think there is." His hand moved deliberately to the radio clipped to his shoulder, and when he pressed the transmit button, his voice changed, louder, official, performative. "Dispatch, this is Officer Michelson. I need additional units at Pritchard Memorial. Possible narcotics activity in progress." Gasps, immediate, uncontrolled. Nadine's hand slipped from Kellan's arm. Kellan didn't move, but every muscle in his body went completely still. And Brent Michelson, finally, looked satisfied. Possible narcotics activity in progress hung in the air long after Brent Michelson released the radio button. For several seconds, no one moved. The quiet shock of it spread faster than panic. Faces turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A woman near the chapel entrance covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Drugs?" like they had misheard. Kellan Ellison stood exactly where he was, eyes fixed on Brent. His voice came out controlled, lower now. "You just reported a felony investigation at my mother's funeral." Brent tilted his head slightly, no hesitation, no sign of reconsidering. "If there's nothing to hide, there won't be a problem." Gerald Pritchard stepped forward from the chapel entrance, hands raised slightly in a calming gesture. "Officer Mickelson, I need to be clear. This is a licensed service facility. We follow state." Brent turned sharply toward him. "Then you won't mind cooperation." Pritchard stopped speaking. The shift in Brent's posture was unmistakable now, no longer watching, no longer implying. He had moved into enforcement mode. His stance widened slightly. One hand rested near his belt. His eyes stayed on Kellan like everything else in the area was background noise. Kellan inhaled once, slow. "Officer," he said, "you're making a serious claim without cause. There is no investigation here. There is no criminal activity. You're disrupting a funeral." Brent stepped closer again, close enough that Kellan could smell coffee on his breath. "You don't get to decide what's cause. I do." Nadine stepped forward despite herself. "Please, this isn't the time for this. We're burying his mother." Brent didn't look at her. His gaze never left Kellan, and something in his expression had hardened further. Something personal, something settled long before he ever walked across that parking lot. "You people always say that," he muttered. The words were quiet, but several people heard them. A visible ripple of discomfort moved through the group. One of Kellan's cousins spoke up sharply. "What does that mean?" Brent ignored him completely. Two patrol vehicles turned into the lot almost simultaneously, tires crunching over gravel as they parked near the entrance. Doors opened. Uniformed officers stepped out, scanning the scene, immediately picking up tension without understanding context. One of them approached Brent. "What's the situation?" Brent didn't break eye contact with Kellan. "Detention pending investigation." He then reached forward and grabbed Kellan's wrist. It happened fast, sudden, firm, deliberate. Gasps erupted instantly. Nadine shouted, "Stop!" Kellan didn't pull away. His military training held. His body stayed upright, controlled, but his voice dropped even lower. "You are making a mistake," he said. Brent's grip tightened. "Turn around." "I am not resisting, but you need legal grounds." Brent shoved his shoulder. "Turn." Several family members moved forward at once, voices rising, confusion, anger, disbelief mixing together. One of the assisting officers hesitated visibly, looking between Brent and the grieving crowd. "Brent, what exactly do we have?" he asked quietly. Brent didn't answer him. He forced Kellan's arm behind his back. Metal cuffs came out. The sound of them clicking open cut through the air, sharp, mechanical, irreversible. And for the first time, doubt flickered across the faces of the other officers watching. The second cuff locked around Kellan Ellison's wrist with a clean, metallic snap. For a moment, the only sound in the parking lot was Nadine's voice breaking. "Please, stop! He hasn't done anything!" No one answered her. Officer Brent Michelson adjusted his grip and began guiding, then forcing Kellan toward the nearest patrol car. The movement was controlled, but aggressive, meant to display authority more than necessity. Kellan did not resist. His posture stayed upright, steps measured, even with his arms restrained behind him. One of the assisting officers stepped closer, speaking low enough that only Brent could hear. "What evidence do we have for detention?" Brent didn't slow down. "Reasonable suspicion," he said flatly. "Based on what?" Brent opened the rear door of the patrol car and turned Kellan slightly. "Based on what I observed." That was all he offered. The officer hesitated, clearly unsatisfied, but didn't push further. Procedure often followed confidence, and Brent carried himself like someone who expected to be obeyed. Kellan lowered himself into the back seat without assistance. He leaned forward slightly to clear his head under the doorframe, controlled movement, deliberate. He had been trained to manage physical restraint, trained to regulate breathing, trained not to escalate. But his eyes remained fixed on Brent. "This is unlawful detention," Kellan said calmly. You are acting without probable cause, without warrant, and without grounds for public arrest. Brent shut the car door hard enough to rattle the frame. Save it, you can explain everything downtown. Outside the vehicle, the funeral gathering had dissolved into confusion and anger. Several relatives were arguing with the remaining officers. Gerald Pritchard stood off to the side, phone pressed to his ear, voice tight as he spoke rapidly. Likely legal counsel, possibly municipal administration. Nadine hadn't moved from where she stood when the cuffs went on. Her hands were still raised slightly, like her body hadn't caught up with what just happened. Inside the patrol car, Kellan sat still. His breathing was steady, shoulders squared, eyes forward now. Processing. Two officers climbed into the front seats. The engine started. Gravel shifted beneath the tires as the vehicle pulled away from the chapel, slowly at first, then turning onto the main road. No one in the front spoke for nearly 2 minutes. Finally, the driver glanced at the rearview mirror. "Sir, for documentation, state your full name." Kellan answered immediately. "Lieutenant Kellan Marcus Ellison." The driver blinked once. "Occupation?" "United States Army, Logistics Command, Fort Liberty." Silence. The passenger officer turned halfway in his seat. "Active duty?" "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. The driver's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. He looked at his partner, then at Brent's patrol vehicle visible ahead of them through traffic. Something had just shifted. Not in accusation, not in procedure, in consequence. Neither officer spoke again for the remainder of the drive. But by the time they reached the station parking lot, both of them already understood this arrest was no longer routine. And inside the building, once identification was formally verified, the first phone call that Brent Michelson could not control. The call was placed less than 12 minutes after Lieutenant Kellan Ellison's identity was formally verified. Not to Brent Michelson, not to Patrol Command, to Internal Affairs. By early afternoon, the holding area outside processing had become unusually quiet. Officers who had initially treated the arrest like routine paperwork were now speaking in low voices, reviewing forms twice, checking timestamps, replaying radio logs. Because the facts were no longer aligning with the report Brent had filed. No narcotics evidence were covered. No witness statements supporting suspicion, no surveillance indicators, no prior investigation tied to the location, only a funeral, and an arrest initiated solely by Officer Brent Michelson. By early afternoon, investigator Felicity Pierce arrived. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't speculate, she requested records, dispatch audio, body cam footage, incident narrative, response justification. Then she watched the footage in full, without interruption. The parking lot, the confrontation, the accusation, the language, the physical detention. She replayed one section twice, the moment Brent muttered, "You people always say that." That line was marked for transcription. The next morning, interviews began. Funeral staff, witnesses, responding officers, dispatch operators. Then the venue dispute surfaced. Gerald Pritchard confirmed it, scheduling records confirmed it, phone logs confirmed Lorraine Michelson's complaint, and eventually text messages recovered from Brent's personal phone confirmed something more damaging. He had decided to intervene before arriving. He had discussed not letting it slide. He had referenced the funeral as suspicious before seeing anything. Premeditation was established. Within 3 weeks, Brent Michelson was suspended pending termination. Within 3 months, a federal civil rights lawsuit was filed. Within a year, the case went to trial. The jury reviewed everything: the arrest procedure, the fabricated justification, the personal connection to the venue dispute, the racial language, the lack of probable cause, and the public humiliation of a man detained while burying his mother. The jury deliberated for just under 6 hours. Verdict: liability confirmed. False arrest, abuse of authority, civil rights violation, intentional misconduct. Damages awarded: $40 million. Brent Michelson was dismissed from service, certification revoked, administrative penalties followed. Lieutenant Kellan Ellison never celebrated the ruling. According to testimony from family, the only place he went afterwards was the cemetery, standing beside the grave where the funeral had been interrupted months earlier. No statement, no media appearance, just closure. And the official record now reflects what witnesses saw from the beginning. The arrest was never about law enforcement. It was personal, it was reckless, and it was deliberate. If you want more breakdowns like this, where we walk through exactly what happened, step by step, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with us for the next story.